everyone to the OpenActive Adoption Engagement Forum on the 11th of February 2025. Thank you very much everyone for joining. I'll start with the usual reminders for those who are familiar with the calls, and if you're new, then these are just a few sort of notes on OpenActive before we get started. So if you're not already involved, then please do join our Slack workspace. It's completely free to join, and it's a really good space to keep up to date with everything that's going on in OpenActive and to collaborate, communicate with other organisations and people in the OpenActive community to find out what's going on and ask questions and all of that sort of thing. And so please do sign up through that link at slack.openactive.io, and it'd be great to see you there. The slides and the recordings for these adoption engagement forum meetings are all shared openly through our Google Drive, our OpenActive Google Drive, and our OpenActive YouTube channel. So if you would like to catch up with any past meetings, then please do look through the archive there. And if you have any questions, then our email address is hello@openactive.io, so please do get in touch, and we'll be happy to try and help. Quick look at the agenda today. So we'll have our usual round of introductions just to get familiar with people on the call. We have Craig here from Move Consulting. He's going to give us a bit of background context into some of the work there in the physical activity for health pathways space. And we also have Zach here from London Sport. He's kindly agreed to give us a bit of an update on and background on some of the work that London Sport have done in this area as well. And then we should have plenty of time for a nice kind of open discussion. We have a few kind of question prompts that will prompt that discussion, and when we get there, and a bit of time at the end for any other business. So I'll start with the usual round of introductions with myself. I'm Tim Corby. I'm an engagement consultant at the Open Data Institute. And here at the ODI, we act as stewards for OpenActive currently, and as part of that role, we chair and run secretariat services for these community meetings. So I'll be chairing the meeting today, and I'll go first to my colleague Andrew, who's in the room here with me at the ODI office.
Hi, I'm Andrew Newman. I'm Principal Data Specialist at the ODI, and I'm the co-lead for the OpenActive project here at the Open Data Institute, focusing on the infrastructure aspects.
Thanks, Andrew. Howard, can I come to you next?
Yeah, hi, Howard Askew, data technologist at the Open Data Institute, and I support some of the technical aspects surrounding the OpenActive initiative and some other open data initiatives at the ODI.
Thanks, Howard. Rounding out the ODI team, I'll come to you, Darren.
Yeah, hi, I'm Darren Temple. I'm also a data technologist supporting Howard, supporting the technical stuff with OpenActive.
Great, thanks, Darren. And this is no particular order, just how you're coming up on the participant list. So if I'll come to you first, Craig.
Hi, I'm Craig Blaine. I'm Director and owner of Move Consulting. And as you've introduced, I'm here today to talk about our work around physical activity for health pathways.
Brilliant, thanks, Craig. Emma.
Hi, I'm Emma Gooch. I'm the Data and Insight Manager at Yorkshire Sport Foundation. Been part of this group for a while, although a lot of the work also sits with Jules Pratt, who you might have seen on some of these calls too.
Great, thanks, Emma. Grace?
Yeah, I'm Grace from SASP, that's Somerset Activity and Sports Partnership. I'm the Open Data Project Officer and I look after their activity finder.
Great, thanks, Grace. And Kate?
Hi, I'm Kate. I'm Strategic Lead for Health and Equalities from Greater Manchester Moving. It's my first time on one of these meetings, so I'm on a bit of a learning curve, but yeah, it's great to be along and see what's going on.
Fantastic. We're really pleased to have you, Kate, so thank you very much for joining. Laura?
Hi, my name's Laura and I work at Disability Rights UK, and I'm the Programme Manager for the Get Yourself Active programme. Like Kate, it's my first meeting today and I'm just here to see how we can link in with some of the great work that you're already doing.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Laura, and welcome to both you and Kate. Thank you very much for joining. Great to see you and to meet you. And lastly, Zach.
Hi, everyone. I'm Zach. I work as a project manager in digital tech and innovation at London Sport.
Fantastic. Thanks, Zach. Brilliant. So that's really nice to meet you all. Thanks very much for joining. Oh, I think we've just had someone else join last second there. Debbie, are you there? We're just doing a quick round of introductions. I don't know if you'd quickly like to introduce yourself.
Oh. Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Sorry. So my name's Debbie. I work for a active partnership called Energize Me. We're based in Hampshire and the Isle of Wight.
Brilliant. Thanks, Debbie. Really pleased to welcome you here. Thank you for joining.
Thanks.
And so we'll just get started then with the main kind of chunk of the agenda, which Craig's going to lead us off with. So Craig, if I can pass over to you.
Yes, indeed. I'm going to share my screen because I put together some slides reflecting on what I'm going to share. It'll probably be easier for me to talk to something for you to have a look at. And by all means, I'm happy to kind of share these afterwards as a resource if required.
Should hopefully be
Right.
now.
If you bear with me just 2 seconds, I'm usually a Teams person rather than a Zoom person, but it's on its way. It's on its way.
It looks like it's coming through.
Hey, perfect. Right. Okay. So, with regards to our organisation and a project that we're working in collaboration with the Active Partnerships National Organisation, supported by Coventry University from an academic perspective and funded by Sport England, what we're aiming to do is create some consistent information, guidance, perhaps tools, depends on what we find and what we curate through the process that we're developing, a block of information that can help us for creating physical activity for health pathways. By title, Physical Activity for Health, what we mean are connecting pathways that support us to add value to current NHS services or health systems locally, where we can use physical activity as an asset to support communities to move more often, improve their health, and stay in good health for as long as we can. Now, the project itself, I mentioned the word curation just ever so slightly before, is really much about that. This is more about understanding what's happening locally and listening to a range of different partners from across the health sector and utilising what we already have. And then once we have that understanding of what we have, plugging the gaps, developing the innovations that are required as a result of that. So the slides that I've put together today are just to give you a very quick overview of the project. And if you have any queries or questions afterwards, I've popped contact details and some web pages that you can go to find out a little bit more. But if I make my way through the slides that we have set for today's meeting, essentially the Physical Activity for Health Pathways project is a key component part of a broader range of work that the Active Partnerships National Organisation are leading on, which is around strides to integrate physical activity into health. So as I alluded to earlier on, pathways can play a key role in doing that. By pathway, what we mean is process, really. It's a replacement term for process to a degree. So if we hypothetically imagine a scenario where you as an individual need to engage with your health provider locally, whether that be your GP in primary care, or you've gone to hospital for whatever reason, if physical activity could play part of that care package that may be suggested to you, we want to ensure that health partners and wider partners who might be able to refer into a pathway, a system locally, are aware of the opportunities to do that, what's involved in it, how they can access it, how they can support you to access it. So pathway as process is one way of describing this, if you will. To help us to understand what that solution, if we call it that, needs to look like, there's been between February of last year to today's date a whole range of consultation and engagements with stakeholders. So we're in the region of around 150 different organisations from the health sector and the physical activity sector have engaged in the project so far. And the diagram on the right hand side of the screen here, that the writing might be a little bit small for you to be able to pick out on the screen, but essentially this version of an onion diagram, I guess, gives an impression of the types of stakeholders that we've worked with, as well as name checking some of the specific ones as well. The outer region of that diagram that you're looking at are those national placed or national based organisations with that remit over a much larger area. So from a physical activity side, we're working with the likes of, obviously, Sport England as a key funder for this, SIMPSPA as the identified chartered institute for the physical activity sector workforce, leisure organisations and representative bodies such as Community Leisure UK, UK Active, so on and so forth. From a health side of things, we're being supported and working collaboratively with the likes of NHS England, NHS Horizons, the Office for Health Improvement and Disparities, and essentially at that national level, we're trying to find solutions to work better together and bring those two sides of, if we imagine it being a Venn diagram, closer together and overlapping where they relevantly need to, so we can work better together. As you work towards the center of that diagram, essentially we come closer to the coalface until we get to the very middle, which are those key roles that are working with individuals who would benefit from engaging in activity to support their health. So it's the likes of allied healthcare professionals, GP practitioners as a key example and role identified. It could be exercise referral specialists working in leisure. It could be social prescribing link workers. So what we're trying to convey here is essentially we're looking from top to bottom, side, left to right, side to side, to get as broad a perspective as we possibly can. Now, helping us to explore all of this, it's not just the team at Move Consulting that are working on this. As mentioned, we're supported academically by Coventry University, who are providing a level of evidential rigor to the processes that we're going through to make sure that the evidence base available supports the project and its findings. And more pragmatically, we're supported by 39 member organisations to our communities of practice. There are 5 communities of practice that all have an individual theme, and essentially, as we're coming across curious questions or areas for further investigation, we go to those individuals and we ask them key questions under the themes that they sit within, and they cascade that consultation out to their local networks. So essentially, getting as many people and as many perspectives and views involved in the decisions that we make as we progress the project. And essentially, what we're trying to get to, as I mentioned from the off, is developing information and guidance to support the creation of the physical activity for health pathway. So a current example of what you might see if you think about your local systems, and they do vary, and there are some brilliant examples of practice that we're drawing out from the different communities and partnerships that we see. But a typical example might be an exercise by referral or an exercise on referral scheme, which is referred into typically, but not atypically, by a GP or a healthcare practitioner into a prescribed exercise program delivered by a appropriately qualified fitness professional under the current policy and guidance. If we imagine what we want to do, because there is a much greater range of assets available, individuals in a workforce, as well as opportunities to support people in a broader sense of their health, we want to unlock that system to make it easier for more people to be recommended, signposted, advocated for an active lifestyle, and to different opportunities that may exist within our local communities. And again, a typical example that we might see, or you may reflect and be able to see in your local communities, are that to a degree, the only option available is a referral program, and anything above and beyond that is at the will of an individual and their interests. So we're trying to expand the opportunities through the project and make them part of this connected pathway at place. There are 4 key elements that sit as part of the programme, and these are co-designed and co-developed through the learnings of the programme as much as what we set out with at the beginning. And as I've alluded to, one of the key things we want to get to is creating stronger connections between community organisations to ensure that we're utilising the available assets that we have and we're adding value to that local system. Co-design and development of any solutions happening. Again, that 150 strong organisations that have engaged with the project so far, and our communities of practice are helping us to ensure that we keep that alive and we're understanding the solutions that are required or the challenges being experienced so we can keep exploring them. And that brings us to the insight and learning side of things, which is very much a continual process for us in this project. We are looking to come to the conclusion of this phase of work at the end of March this year. and then we'll look at what the next steps need to be, and we're continually listening and shaping conclusions, if we call it that, as we work through. So insight and learning is absolutely imperative to the success of this project, and it will continue all the way through, right up until the end, wherever that may be. One key element as well is obviously integration and collaboration. There's a strong need for partnerships, hence the appropriate connections that we have with key organisations, and the Active Partnership National Organisation and the support of the Active Partnership Network, as well as other partners from across the physical activity and health sectors, have been really key to helping us understand who and where we should go and collaborate with as we work through. But there are 4 key principles that have supported us as we go through. Now, as a really quick insight to the findings and insights that we've understood so far from the project's development since February of last year, are 2 key things, I guess, that we are calling at the moment our development considerations. That's the left-hand side of the screen that you're looking at here, and then our core design features, which are the right-hand side of the screen. Now, the development considerations are a group of 8 key areas of focus that we found are the consistent considerations that every local system, group of partners, individual health program that's being run need to consider in order for that to work well. Whether the different areas and examples that we've looked at have been connected or completely independent and different, these are the 8 things that come up most commonly, and to a degree we could consider these to be the chapter headings of a book if we were trying to write them. From a health and physical activity pathway perspective, policy is essentially one of the key things that will allow for different activities and or developments to happen. If the policy is in place, then it will allow things to flow more freely. So what we've identified is a need to stretch and amend policies to make sure that they're pragmatic and they're reflective of what the needs are locally. Now, connected to all of these, we have what we call our ambition statements. Now, I don't have them as part of our presentation for today, but if you go on to the URL that I'll give you at the end of this presentation, which is moveconsulting.co.uk/pathways, then you'll be able to view a bit more information about these development considerations and see what those ambition statements are. Essentially, for each of the 8 that we've identified, the ambition statements help to give an understanding of what we feel, based on the consultations we've had so far, good looks like in these areas. We're intentionally not calling it a best practice statement or anything to that ilk yet, because what we want to do is make sure that we take a pragmatic approach to this and a rigorous approach to it, and we evaluate and test things as we go. And once evaluations are completed, maybe we can influence and nuance that language. But at this point in time, ambition statement, call it a vision for each we have. So policy sits at the top, if we call it that, and it's a real key part to it. What flows out from there is commissioning, which is how things are paid for and what is being designed as a result of the funding that's put into a local system. Evaluation touches on how we understand what is working well and what might need to change. Communications, partnerships and technology run through the core, and they're really, really important with regards to who's involved, how those individuals or organisations communicate, how the service provided is communicated outwards, and technology and data play a real key role in that, as well as the foundation of those development considerations being the workforce, who is delivering physical activity opportunities locally, who is managing them, who is coordinating them, and then how they work being the operations. And that brings me to the right-hand side of the slide that you're looking at here, which, when we've looked at how pathways are being delivered locally, how systems are connecting and physical activity provision or interventions are then presented to local communities, we see these 5 characteristics that are there. All the language is subject to change as we're continuing to think about how we phrase and how we title things, but essentially at the beginning of any intervention that we've seen being delivered, there are considerations around recruitment, how we identify, reach and engage a priority audience for a pathway and or an intervention type. Then triage, how we're understanding the needs of an individual as much as what they require, how they prefer things to happen, what they like, what they dislike, and that helps to shape an offer to a degree. And the component parts of that offer that we found are behaviour change support, which we've placed at the top here because behaviour change support can filter through all of the 4 elements below it, and also the structured opportunity that may be delivered. And that's where the real connection to the work of the ODI and understanding how we can highlight the availability of those activity opportunities in the best possible way to support pathways. And then finally, exit routes, which has significantly nuanced over the course of the period that we've run the project to date. We started with the language of exit route, and essentially what we mean in that phase is at the point an individual's needs begin to change, perhaps they no longer require the level of support provided by a pathway or an intervention. How and what do we do to support that person to take their next best steps? That might be that their needs change in terms of they need more support. So it might be a continued referral on to other services, or it might be that they're in a better position to become more independently active, as we may term it, even though we do recognise that not every individual will be able to be truly independently active, particularly if somebody's living with a disability and requires additional assistance in order to do so. But nevertheless, how do we signpost, refer, or recommend them to the right level of support they need, dependent on the individual's needs at that point? So that brings me to my final slide, which essentially is exploring how we can utilise data, and particularly how the OpenActive project as a starter of our point of interest with regards to utilising data and bringing it into the project comes around. And there are a range of applications and opportunities we've identified so far. Some of them we can see on the screen here, just very simply bullet pointed, but the availability of information that's generated through the data that we have and the infrastructure that supports that to happen can help us to highlight the availability of assets in our communities that may be underutilised, that could be part of offering a broader solution or a range of opportunities for people. They can help us with delivery at scale. If we're consistently speaking about things in a consistent way, then it means that the idea of scalability or replication of opportunities can certainly be opened up. It will almost certainly improve access both for individuals as well as for the professionals that may be part of pathways, whether that be delivering, administering, managing, or even commissioning. And then it will quite obviously support the monitoring and evaluation of them. So we have 2 questions that are in the back of our minds at this point in time, as well as a range of others, which is how should we frame the use of data to support the development of pathways, to make it land for as many stakeholders as we can locally? What are the words, phrases, and types of examples that will make people sit up and listen? And then secondly, which ways do we see it already being used to enhance the delivery of programmes? Because throughout the guidance and the information we're developing, we want to pepper through lots of examples of practice to ensure that we're showing how it can be done rather than, let's say, dictating how it should be done. It would be a case of here's some broad guidance and considerations to make, and here's an example of how one organisation or area is utilising it in the best way possible. And that brings me to the end of my short presentation. So as promised earlier on, the URL for the website, if you want to find out more about the Physical Activity for Health Pathways project, is moveconsulting.co.uk/pathways. Obviously, if you visit the main website of moveconsulting.co.uk, you'll find out more about us. And if you have any specific questions, then please do get in touch. And I've put my email at the bottom there, which is craig@moveconsulting.co.uk. So that's me. I will stop sharing my screen and I'll hand back over to you, Tim. If anybody has any questions, please let me know.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Craig. That was really valuable and really interesting. I think really helps set the context for the discussion today. And I think your last point about trying to find examples of best practice is a good segue to lead into Zach. So I think if we'll come to Zach first, and then I'm sure there's people itching with questions and things they want to pick up on what you've brought to the table today, Craig. So we'll try and make sure we've got plenty of time for that. But I think if we come to you first Zach, and Zach's here from London Sport, the Active Partnership in London, and they've been doing quite a bit of work over the last few years, investigating the potential for the use of data and open data and active in referral settings. So Zach's kindly agreed to give a bit of a kind of update and a bit of background into some of that work. And then once Zach's had that chance to speak, we can then go into questions. So please be thinking of questions and comments, and feel free to put it in the chat if you don't want to forget something that's at the front of your mind at the moment, and then we can have a good discussion. Okay, so over to you.
Thanks very much, Tim. I'll be talking about a little bit about the work that London Sport are doing within sort of health and digital space. Just to give a bit of background and context, is that London Sport did a study in 2021 looking at the use of open data in referral settings, specifically within physical activity in referral settings. And the overall findings of this study was that physical activity within referral settings is quite low. So people are not really generally socially prescribed physical activity. And this is primarily due to a few reasons, one being the lack of available data and available sessions within social prescribing platforms. Number two being link workers not having the necessary links with these organizations and then feeling reluctant to refer individuals that they're working with to organizations that they don't have a personal relationship with. And the third one is the overall sort of reticence of physical activity within that sector. As a result of this study, which was about 4 years ago now, London Sport are looking into ways to address some of these issues. The first one being the lack of available data on social prescribing platforms. It seems like oftentimes these social prescribing platforms are not making most of the use of open data. Most of the data that they gather and collect is based off of their contracts that they have with local authorities or other sectors, and they collect data primarily from those sources. We are working with one social prescribing platform in particular, being the Joy app. We're present in around 16 London boroughs. And we're looking to see whether we can have them ingest our OpenActive data set, which contains more or less all of OpenActive data within an open referral compliant format, to see whether they can put this onto their platform and whether this will result in an increase in the amount of people who are being socially prescribed physical activity. We've been working with them for the better part of a year now to try and get this feed into their platform. There's been a few hiccups and a few ups and downs, but we're at a stage where they've started to ingest some of our data. There's been a few issues with the ingestion process, and we're attempting to try and facilitate that as much as possible. We're hoping within the next few months we'll be at a stage where this data set will be on their marketplace, which is used by link workers and also for self-referrals. And we're hoping also a little bit further down the line that this data set will also be within their GP and clinician-facing system, which recommends potential referrals to GPs and so on and so forth. So that's where we're at with this sort of digital social prescribing project. A few interesting stats which have come out as a result of this project is the overall data in terms of the total number of referrals and how many of those relate to exercise and fitness, and the total number of services and how many of those relate to exercise and fitness. So in 2024, there was on Joy's platform around 300,000 referrals in total. Only 4% of those pertain to physical activity. There was a total of about 24,000 services, and only 6% of those relate to physical activity. And generally speaking, the highest issues that social prescribers are facing in terms of the patients that they're dealing with is isolation and loneliness, long-term health conditions, so type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular, and musculoskeletal being the top ones. All of these could potentially benefit from physical activity and having physical activity referrals, but despite that, the number of referrals is still extremely low. So we're hoping that having more services on there would potentially lead to an increased amount of referrals, but we're also skeptical that this potentially might not be the case as well, which is what we're hoping to find out from this pilot work, which we're hoping will be done by sort of this time next year. We're looking to run it for a period of 6 months. So that's where we're at with the digital social prescribing stuff. We are also doing another project working with automating health referrals. Currently in the UK, we have health referral systems from leisure centres, for example, the GLL, and we're looking at doing a piece of work in terms of whether this whole process can be automated, from the identification of patients to the recommendations to GPs and clinicians, and to the ongoing support of people who are referred into the programs as well. So the general idea of this is to have access to NHS data. Using that access, running a sort of automated query to identify patients initially with type 2 diabetes or at risk of type 2 diabetes who might benefit from being referred into a health referral program. These recommendations are sent directly to the individuals via automated messaging, but they could also be sent to GPs if they regularly visit their GPs, and then it's a question of either the individual self-referring into the health referral program or GPs referring the individual into the health referral program. The sort of idea around this is to understand whether this is going to create some sort of capacity and resource saving for GPs and for the GLL in general, and the sort of overall efficacy of automating this process, whether it makes health referral schemes work more efficiently and with more user engagement as well. Alongside this, we're hoping to also have an extension in terms of adding a coach bot, which helps users stay engaged within the health referral process, which is around 8 weeks. But we know that from data that there's a significant drop-off rate within the first 4 weeks of the health referral program, and beyond that, there's a significant drop-off rate after the 8 weeks have been completed. The user retention is generally quite low. So we're looking into different ways of being able to continuously make users engage and feel supported throughout the process and beyond. Where we're at currently with this project is we're at the very initial phases of it. We've just secured some funding to start developing an MVP. The MVP would basically be co-designed using the help of clinicians, public health, and others. And following that co-design process, we'll start the building of an MVP. The MVP, we hope, would be a product that we can use to then demonstrate the potential impact of what this piece of work would do, and to help secure more funding to be able to test this out in an actual live environment using around 100 to 150 patients as an initial sort of testing point. And we're looking to test this out in RBKC initially, but this is all very, very much dependent on funding. So we're currently in phase 1 of this project. We're hoping to finish phase 1 within the next 6 to 9 months, and that would be the sort of development of the MVP. Once the minimum viable product is developed, we'll be attempting to source more funding, and we're also submitting more funding applications as we go along. If we're able to get the further funding, then the ideal scenario is that we're going to be testing this out in multiple boroughs across London, one of them being RBKC, and we'll be testing it with the initial long-term health condition of type 2 diabetes, with the potential to also scale across other long-term health conditions, again, dependent on funding. And lastly, at Sport, we've also done a piece of work in terms of club data. We, with the help of the GLA and funding of the GLA and impact on urban health, we mapped out community clubs across London. From this data set, we've gathered around 7,000 to 8,000 community clubs all across London. And we also have some data that we were able to gather for outside of London as well. So we have this quite valuable data set in terms of community clubs, and a sort of a data collection standard that we created as part of this project. And we would basically like to know in terms of different use cases of this data set now and what we can potentially do with this. So this is where the stage that we're at the moment is trying to engage with stakeholders, both internally and externally, to find out what they would value most from this data set. There's been a few recommendations already in terms of potential data and insight that can be gathered from this, overlaying this data with other data sets, for example, crime indicators, to understand whether there is any sort of overlap between the prevalence of community clubs and the prevalence of youth crime violence as well. Is there less youth crime in areas where there are more community clubs, for example, is a question that we're looking to answer with some of this data. But open to ideas, and if anyone wants to contribute or drop me an email directly, I'll drop my email in the chat. And relating to any of these projects, more than happy to discuss this at any point in time. Thank you very much. Back to you, Tim.
Fantastic. Thank you, Zach. That was, there's a lot taken there. Shows the breadth and scope of what's going on at the sports. So yeah, really interesting. I'll share my screen. We've got a couple of kind of questions to prompt a discussion, but happy for this to be a fairly kind of open discussion of whatever people are thinking, whatever people want to most pick up on, in terms of what both Craig and Zach have set the context for at the start of the call. So just while I'm sharing the screen, does anyone have any questions or comments to ask Craig or Zach on what I spoke about?
Tim, can I jump in with a question?
Yeah, please do.
I think probably for Craig rather than Zach. I've been running over your work, Craig, and this kind of type of physical activity pathways for healthcare. I'm just wondering, are you interested in designing pathways that people can be referred to. So I don't know, after you've had a heart attack, you have a pathway that gradually gets you walking more. Or are you interested in building physical activity into clinical pathways that already exist, or is it a bit of both?
The latter. So with regards to pathways, again, to the point I made around it's a replacement for process. So to a degree, no matter your level of need, what we want to try and build through the guidance is an assurance that there is opportunities that are available to you that are accessible. And a pathway is a way that we describe how we make those things accessible. Now, if the thing you require as an individual, because everything will need to be and should be quite rightly person-centered and required or based on an individual's needs and requirements, if the need is a simple advocacy message for building activity into your daily lifestyle and habits, the pathway element would be how and where and what do we signpost that person to, or what web page is it that we sign people to. That's one very far end of the spectrum, all the way up to, if you can imagine all the touch points in the middle, those people that are in rehabilitation from an acute issue such as a heart attack. So they will be in a clinical setting, very likely supported by a medical professional who has a deep understanding of their medical needs at that point in time. The point here is between those two extremes, your needs will change. You won't always need that high-end tailored support. So to that exit route or the transition element, as your needs change, where do you then go? Or is it in reality what we sometimes see? You get kicked out of one service and you're back out in the wild world all on your own. So it's about just better connections. The big common ones that we see are clinical pathways, being those recovering from particular acute conditions or after having had an adverse event, as we might call it. Exercise by referral, which suggests another route in, which is some activities may be predominantly due to, if we flip the coin on this, the requirement of managing available assets locally. Recruitment or referral in as a recruitment process is a way of managing that rather than it being led by risk, which is something that's changing. Then we have these other terms that are loosely used, but they do describe slightly nuanced ways of accessing things. So there is signposting, which from a health side of things, there's varying levels of confidence in signposting because of the potential litigation that comes with that. If I signpost somebody to something, it's not a direct referral. What happens if is kind of the question that comes about. But that's, let's say, one step down from formal referral. And then we have recommendation to a degree, which might be, I'm not signposting you to something, but I'm suggesting, based on what I understand for you and of you, that you might be interested in joining a community club where you can meet other people. And I know that you like to walk, so here's a walking group locally or a network of walking groups as an example. So whether they're the right terms to use, the ones that we have in mind at the moment are it's everything from advocating for a physically active lifestyle, which is the lightest touch. It's probably not specifically pathway, but it's something to definitely consider. And it is something that we would advocate for, the advocation of a physically active lifestyle. And then the starting points of that more formal spectrum start with recommendation, then to signposting, then to referral, and then to what we might define as closed pathways, which are those high specialist need pathways where you can't refer into them from outward. The bit that wraps all the way around, which is a growing area, is the concept or the ability for self-referral as well, which if we think of the NHS 10-year plan and the shifts that we think are going to come within that, that's something that we need to ensure we can support, i.e. empowering people to take greater ownership for their health and be able to access things without the need of a referrer. But that whole process could be supported by a person or a thing is the simple way that we talk about it. And Zach alluded to an exact brilliant example of a thing being an AI assisted bot, I guess, that can support people to navigate the mountains of information that are available on the open web. So yeah, I hope that answers your question and gives a bit more context to it though.
No, it does, Craig. Thank you. It's just something I've been mulling over since we spoke last time, and I think it's quite a useful clarification for this conversation that we're going into.
Yeah, brilliant. Not a problem.
Great, thank you, Andrew and Craig. And I think you had your hand up, but it's gone down. Does that mean that your question was answered, or you?
I was thinking of the best way to ask the question is why I put my hand down, and I started typing it in the chat because sometimes it then helps me to understand the question I'm trying to actually ask. Craig, I think what you presented is really great and exactly what I know certainly our local partners have been looking for a while in terms of being able to signpost people to sport and physical activity opportunities who are on the health pathways or are at risk of things like type 2 diabetes. We've had a lot of conversations though, and this is the bit I was pondering in my head. Is it even a question or is it just a thought dump? We've had a lot of conversations locally about this and how we integrate it with some of our activity finders that we've had in the past and use those as places for social prescribers, etc., to go to. And we've always come across the same problem in terms of, I guess they don't just want all of the activities to be available. They want more of a vetted system. So you're a trusted provider, you're not a trusted provider, knowing who the trusted providers are and that the people that they signpost to are going to go to something that's actually suited to their needs. So I guess my question then probably jumps to Zach and some of the work that you did, I think, in the first project that you were explaining about, where you got the data uploaded onto one of the social prescribing platforms, and absolutely interested to see whether that does increase the sport and physical activity referrals. I think that'll be a great bit of research when that comes out. How did you go about getting those opportunities onto that social prescribing platform? Did you use standard OpenActive tools such as Open Sessions, or is there a different way that you went about doing that to make sure that there was that kind of vetted thing in place, or were they not as bothered?
Yeah, it's a really good question, Emma. We had some issues with that initially. As part of our club data project that we've been working on, we were developing this somewhat of an aggregation tool to be able to aggregate some of the data that we were collecting together. And we wanted to make sure that the club data work was also OpenActive compliant. So the aggregator tool that we sort of semi-developed was also to aggregate OpenActive data at the same time. So what we did in order to be able to get all of that data onto the social prescribing platform is aggregate all of OpenActive data together, converted it into an open referral compliant format, and then have all of that data under one data set to be ingested via an API by the social prescribing platform. There are still issues and concerns from the social prescribing side and perspective in terms of quality of data, which obviously we cannot ensure based off of an open data source and open data set. And that's where the concern of a lot of link workers come from as well, is they are not sure the qualitative nature of this data. And without sort of looking further into it and developing relationships with these places, they would feel skeptical to refer people into these physical activity sessions as well. On the social prescribers, and there's some data control mechanisms that they have on their corner as well in terms of trying to control the quality of the data. So we had to sort of play around with our API a little bit to match their data quality controls. One of it, for example, was not having any sessions which don't have an email address on there, so no contact detail. So we had to filter out some of those results to make sure that also bypasses their data quality control mechanisms in place. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, it does. I might drop you an email at some point though, because there might be some further. I might just want to clarify something before I explain that to somebody else, if that's okay.
Sure, absolutely.
If I can add in as well, Emma, it's a different way of looking at the challenge, absolutely, to what Zach's just described there, by way of some insight as to what's happening connected to the project area that we're working on. The question that came to mind when you shared your kind of mind dump, as you called it, I think it was, is the trusted element to it. So the question, and I'm not necessarily wanting an answer now necessarily, but what is it that local stakeholders, health partners want when they say trust? What will make them trust something? Now, a general insight to apply to that, if I'm to jump to some conclusions here, is that trust is often governed by risk, particularly within the health setting. it's a high clinical environment where a lot of the policies come from, but those policies don't necessarily nuance down into community. It's the same level of rigor that's required if you're going to complete a clinical operation as it is all the way through to community-based health and social care, for example. So it doesn't always quite match. Now, the risk element to it is something that we're working with the Faculty of Sport and Exercise Medicine to address in terms of the way that the health system and individuals that are trained and work in that environment are thinking about risk connected to physical activity. You may be aware of this already, but for potentially people listening to the recording as well, there's a key document called the Consensus Statements for Risk for People Living with a Long-Term Health Condition that are focused around physical activity. And they state the evidence as we might know it, that the benefits outweigh the risks when it comes to being active with a long-term health condition. There are some specifics where we do need to take additional requirements and measures to make sure that we maintain a positive experience for people to take part in activity, but the overarching message is moving is better. Now, that message isn't necessarily heard in the practices and the policies that currently exist, so it'll take time to change, but it's one to keep chipping away at as to what do you mean by trust? Because if it is the vetting system that you alluded to, that they need the right level of qualification in order for me to have confidence to signpost them to. From what we understand, that will be at odds with new ways of thinking that will filter through in the NHS 10-year plan and other key strategic changes like that. So don't give up hope just yet with regards to keep chomping at the bit for that. But I hope that gives a little bit of context as well of things to come. And hopefully there will be more information about that risk work shared very soon.
That's really helpful. Thank you, Craig.
Yeah, thanks, Craig. That's really interesting. I just wondered, Zach, if just on what Craig was just outlining there, have you had any sort of insights or feedback from the work you've done so far on what a trusted activity might look like, or what those minimum criteria are for
Yeah.
health workers, or is that?
Yeah, it's a really interesting topic because it seems that there's a lot of sort of variance in regards to that in terms of what a trusted session or a trusted organization might mean to different social prescribers and also to different local authorities. And from my understanding is that social prescribing platforms generally are for-profit companies and their main interest lies with fulfilling the duties of their contracts. And so their sort of notion of trust or definition of what they would see as a trustworthy organization is very much related to the definition of their contractual obligations. So for example, if they have a local authority contract in a specific area where they're looking to put in all of the data that they collected from local authorities, their definition of trust would basically go by what the local authorities has decided what a trusted organization is. And I think that's why also some of the challenge lies as well, because there's no sort of standardized approach in terms of what a trustworthy organization would be seen as from a social prescribing standard as well.
That's pretty interesting. Thank you. Does anyone else have any thoughts or comments or questions either on some of these questions that are on the slide or on anything that's been covered so far? I noticed, Debbie, you put in the chat that you have similar experiences to Emma. I don't know if there's anything from what Emma said that you'd like to follow up on or pick up on, or?
No, just that we've had similar experiences. We've been talking in our active partnership around how can we make our activity finder tool more accessible and usable for that social prescribing community and people that work in the health sector, and trust of a activity is obviously a big consideration, and it seems to be quite relationship based. People have had experience of the activities, etc. before. So it was just, we've been trying to come up with ways to combat a lack of trust, perhaps. And some of that might be using technology in terms of creating immersive experiences where you can see a space before someone then looks to go to it, and how we can use technology and digital tools around our activity finder to try and enhance the use of it and the use of the data that's being pulled into it. Just something that we've been mulling on and starting to look at the moment. I think the next thing as well is obviously the trust from the individual, not just the sort of social prescriber or the healthcare professional, but taking the next step or the first step is the biggest sort of part. So how can we use the data and make it as enticing, as encouraging as possible to actually get them to take the first step, especially when you're talking in the realms of self-referral, and hopefully really reducing any sort of burden on the healthcare system in the first place, where we want these more active communities and we want them to take ownership of their own health and activity levels. It's how do we create trust with them, with the data we have, but also digital tools that are going to be coming from AI, already exist in the terms of video, immersive experiences, especially for people with long-term health conditions or neurodiversity, etc., that may need additional support in order to get there. Again, that was just a brain dump.
No, it's fascinating, really interesting. Thank you for sharing. Any other thoughts, comments? I think someone's just put their hand up. Laura.
Yeah, I find the whole thing around risk fascinating because obviously most local authorities and health are very risk averse. We know this. So the new guidelines are very welcomed. Majority of our work that we do is co-produced, and when we speak with people with impairments and long-term health conditions, as we we'll state very often, and we put that in all our publications, as a disabled person, I'm able to make unwise decisions, and that's my choice. And I think that's very often in conflict with the professionals and the people that they're working with directly. So I think, there is some confidence to be had around that. And I think along kind of the people that are signposting, or in whatever way that looks like, there's a disclaimer saying, you need to go and check these out. This is, that I think that's how we've kind of done it. So we've put quite a lot of literature around that kind of work. And I'm fascinated. We were doing a very similar thing, but we're looking a bit more within social care. So we've got a program called Moving Social Workers, where social workers we know are key messengers around physical activity, and it's about how they open up those pathways to enable people to be more physically active. We've been running this program for quite some time now, so I think there's so many synergies here. And we've just to actually set up a group called Moving Professionals, which is bringing about all health and social care all together to ensure we've got some shared narrative around this kind of work. So for me, this is fascinating. And I think when we're doing our local stuff, everybody wants this kind of information. They want this database kind of thing. How do I refer? And so I'm really, really interested to see how we can kind of utilize this in our day-to-day work, but also how we take some of our learning and from our direct work into this platform. But yeah, I think that the old risk thing is always contentious, particularly when we're talking about disabled people and people with long-term health conditions.
Thanks, Laura. That's great. And Craig's been a very nice comment complimenting your the way you express that. So, and thank you. And yeah, it'd be great to pick up with you following on from the call, because I think could be interesting to see where we might be opportunities to collaborate. And we're doing quite a bit of work with the Paralympics GB and their Everybody Moves campaign as well. So and it might be good to sort of loop you in with some of those conversations as well. We're just going to the last couple of minutes. So are there any kind of last thoughts that anyone has or haven't had the chance to say yet, or any other business that you'd like to cover before the end of the call?
Tim, would it be okay? It's a reflection as much as a point that I came across a couple of weeks ago now that really helped, I think, in a meeting we were running, to open up the ask and make it simpler. So with regards to the middle question that's on the screen here, i.e. the minimum criteria, and the concept of developing trust, there's an element of this which is by association. And the example that I used when I was speaking about the project, I think it was 2 weeks ago now, was the yellow pages. So with regards to that yellow book that's full of contact information about loads of businesses, there is a criteria to get into that book, whatever that is, whether it's you pay for it or whether there needs to be a certain amount of data in order to get into there. But you never really open up the yellow pages, whether my glasses are rose tinted or I'm slightly naive, but you never really open up it with the idea of someone in here, some organisation will be a bit dodgy. By association, because you're in, you must be good. And I think that's the thing we would like to achieve with whatever a directory may be, and the bit we're trying to protect, less risk, which is a word that we to a degree need to pull away from because it's very heavy. It's only 4 letters long, but it's very heavy. Is we want to try and assure that the experience for an individual will be a positive one, but that could be as much as they get a welcome or somebody recognizes them in a way, i.e., recognition there is a new face in my session, as much as they can take part in all of the activity and complete it fully without getting tired or feeling uncomfortable. So the bit we're trying to assure is positive experiences for people taking part in activity. And the way to find them is potentially through a yellow pages, through a directory or a central hub. And what we really want to get underneath the skin of is what's the criteria that gets us in that book or gets us in that directory that we might look at. The focus for our project selfishly is around focusing on those with a long-term health condition. So if any criteria come to mind for anyone with regards to we need to know this before we can advocate, whether that's a local system partner or a personal opinion, throw it our way because we're really interested to see what comes out in the wash, if you will, as a priority. So I just thought I'd throw that in case it helped. And apologies if it's not.
That's great. Thank you, Craig, and a good note to end on. And thank you very much, everyone, for joining. I found it a really fascinating session and a really interesting discussion, and lots to go away and reflect on. And I think possibly some new connections made between the people on the call as well, which is great to see. So yeah, thank you very much, everyone, for giving us your time and for coming along to the session. And really appreciate it. And yeah, look forward to catching up again soon. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Tim. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.